There are places on this earth where history narrows to a single passage, where mountains rise like walls of fate and the wind carries the memory of armies who march toward glory and ruin. The Persian Gate is one such place. A jagged cleft carved into the spine of the Zagros Mountains, it stands silent today, its cliffs towering above a lonely road that winds through stone whispering of ancient victories and forgotten terrors. But more than 2,000 years ago, this narrow gorge became the stage for one of the most perilous moments in the life of a conqueror the world would remember simply as Alexander. He had crossed deserts that seemed endless. He had scaled cities that clung to cliffs. He had shattered armies that had once ruled from the Aegean to the Indus. Yet here in a canyon barely wide enough for a caravan, he walked into a trap so perfect, so devastating, that for a single heartbeat in the long arc of history, the world teetered on the edge of becoming something entirely different. For at the Persian Gate, Alexander did not merely fight a battle. He fought to escape annihilation. He fought to save the dream he carried from Macedon, a dream of empire, of unity, of immortality. This is the story of the day Alexander the Great almost lost everything. Before the drama of the canyon unfolded, the Persian Empire, though wounded, still breathed with the strength of centuries. The banners of Darius III may have fallen at Issus and Gaugamela, but Persia was not a land that surrendered easily. Its mountains shielded villages untouched by foreign hands, its satraps commanded armies of hardened warriors, and its people lived beneath the memory of kings who had ruled the known world long before Macedon had even risen from obscurity. As Alexander marched deeper into the empire, he encountered a realm both collapsing and resisting, a world where loyalty splintered but pride endured. Darius, fleeing toward the eastern provinces, issued desperate calls for resistance. Some governors abandoned him, others plotted, but a few remained fiercely loyal, willing to fight even when defeat seemed inevitable. Among them was Ariobarzanes, satrap of Persis, a man whose name history seldom pronounces, yet whose determination would soon shake the foundations of Alexander's unstoppable campaign. Where other Persian commanders had faltered, Ariobarzanes prepared a stand worthy of ancient legends. He would defend the heartland of Persia not with numbers but with terrain, not with open battle but with strategy carved from stone. And so he turned his gaze toward the Persian Gate, a place the Greeks called Thermopylae reborn, but where fate would reverse its roles. Winter gripped the Zagros Mountains when Alexander's army approached them. Snow swept across the ridges, turning the passes into treacherous corridors where even the bravest soldier marched with caution. Horses stumbled, supply wagons strained, and the bitter wind carved cold into bone. Yet the Macedonian king pressed onward, driven by the belief that once he seized Persepolis, the ceremonial jewel of the Persian Empire, his victory over Darius would be complete. Alexander's veterans had followed him through storms and starvation, across deserts and rivers swollen with melting snows, yet many sensed an unease as they entered the narrowing valley. The mountains seemed to close around them like jaws. The path twisted between sheer cliffs that rose higher than any tower in Macedon. The silence felt unnatural, too deep, as if the land itself watched them. The further they marched, the narrower the pass grew, and still no Persian scouts appeared, no resistance blocked the way. For an army accustomed to enemies shadowing their every move, the emptiness was unsettling. Even Alexander, whose confidence bordered on the divine, paused long enough to consider whether the quiet concealed a danger not yet seen. But the path to Persepolis lay ahead, and he would not be denied. Thus he continued, unaware that in the heights above him, hidden among the rocks and snow, Ariobarzanes prepared an ambush the mountains themselves seemed to endorse. While Alexander advanced, Ariobarzanes studied every twist and crevice of the Persian Gate. He positioned his archers atop cliffs so steep they appeared unreachable. He ordered boulders stacked behind narrow ledges ready to be pushed into the void below. He placed infantry at choke points where even a handful of men could hold off thousands. The satrap had no illusions. He was outnumbered, outmatched, and abandoned by the empire whose heart he defended. But he also understood that this stone corridor was worth 100,000 soldiers if used correctly. For days his men worked, preparing the pass with a patience born of desperation. Fire pits were placed to heat stones that would crack under sudden cold, sending avalanches down the slopes. Spears were fitted to long shafts to strike from above. And through it all, the Persian warriors remained unseen, their presence hidden by the winter fog that clung to the upper ridges like a shroud. When Alexander's scouts failed to detect movement, Ariobarzanes knew his plan had succeeded. He had lured the greatest conqueror of the age into a corridor where retreat would be slow, where maneuver was impossible, and where panic could spread like fire. All he needed now was the moment to strike. It happened as the Macedonians marched into the narrowest section of the pass. The cliffs pressed in so tightly that the phalanx could no longer hold formation. Soldiers walked in columns, their shields scraping against rock, their spears angled low. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the stone walls in steady rhythm until another sound shattered it, a roar from above, a thunder that did not belong to the sky. Boulders cascaded down the cliffs, smashing into the marching column, crushing shields and shattering bones. Arrows rained from hidden ledges, cutting into exposed ranks. Spears descended like fangs from the rocks. The pass transformed in an instant from a quiet corridor into a cauldron of chaos. Men scrambled for cover, slipping on the icy ground. Horses reared and screamed, their riders thrown beneath falling stones. Officers shouted commands that vanished beneath the din of avalanches and the cries of the wounded. Alexander himself was nearly struck, a stone crashing where he had stood only moments before. In that moment, the invincible army of Macedon, the army that had defeated empires, found itself trapped, wounded, and vulnerable. And above them, Ariobarzanes watched, silent and resolute. The trap had been sprung. For the first time since crossing into Asia, Alexander stared at the possibility of total defeat. He saw men crushed beneath the weight of falling stone, columns shattered, momentum reversed, and confusion spreading like smoke through the ranks. The pass offered no room to maneuver, no space to reform the phalanx, no path for cavalry to advance. The Macedonian king, who had faced down the armies of Darius without flinching, felt the cold breath of mortality. Here, in a canyon barely wide enough for a caravan, his empire, his legacy, and his dream of conquering the world trembled. And yet he did not break. Instead, he ordered his men to pull back, not in panic, but with the precision of soldiers hardened by years of war. A retreat through such narrow terrain was agonizingly slow. Yet Alexander rode at the front, shouting for discipline, urging order where chaos threatened to consume everything. The Persians continued their assault, raining death upon the withdrawing columns, but the Macedonians, battered, bleeding, but unyielding, refused to collapse. When they finally emerged from the pass, leaving behind the horrors of the ambush, Alexander understood a truth that stung more deeply than defeat. He had underestimated his enemy. And now he would learn from the mountains themselves how to strike back. Outside the canyon, the Macedonian camp seethed with anger and disbelief. Veterans who had marched with Alexander from the banks of the Hellespont whispered of omens. Officers argued over what had gone wrong. Some urged an immediate assault, but Alexander knew better. Another direct attack would doom them. Instead, he sent his scouts into the wilderness, searching for a path that might lead around the Persian Gate. Days passed, snow deepened, supplies dwindled, the men grew restless, and the mountains offered no answers. Yet Alexander's faith in terrain had been shaped by years of war. He believed that somewhere beyond the visible world, a hidden path wound through the ridges. His persistence was rewarded when a local tribesman was brought before him, a man who knew the secrets of the mountains, who spoke of a shepherd's trail that looped behind the Persian position. It was not a road, it was scarcely even a path, but it was a chance, and Alexander never ignored a chance offered by fate. As night fell over the Zagros Mountains, he prepared to ascend into darkness. The trail was cruel. Narrow, icy, and treacherous, it wound along cliffs where one misstep meant a fall into oblivion. The Macedonians moved in silence, their breath visible in the frigid air, their boots crunching softly against the snow. Torches were forbidden, words were whispered. The night enveloped them like a cloak, concealing their ascent from the Persians who believed the enemy still huddled at the base of the pass. Alexander marched at the front as he always did. His men followed him not merely because he commanded them, but because he shared their hardships. In the glow of faint moonlight, they watched him climb, a solitary figure leading them through the mountains as though destiny itself guided his steps. Hours passed. Dawn crept across the horizon, its pale light revealing the silhouettes of Persian sentries perched atop the cliffs, unaware that the Macedonian army had risen like ghosts behind them. And with the first glimmer of morning, Alexander prepared to strike not from below but from the heavens. The attack began not with a shout, but with the sudden sound of steel in the quiet dawn. Macedonian troops surged down upon the Persian rear, catching Ariobarzanes and his warriors between two fires, Macedonians descending from above, and the remaining forces pushing forward through the pass. The Persians fought with the fury of men defending their homeland. They held their positions against impossible odds, their shields glinting in the pale morning light, their spears meeting the invaders in desperate resistance. Ariobarzanes himself stood among them, refusing to retreat, embodying the last defiant pulse of the ancient empire. But the trap he had built so skillfully now collapsed upon him. Macedonian soldiers poured over the ridges, overwhelming the defenders who could neither turn nor flee. The narrowness of the pass, which had once favored the Persians, now became a prison. By midday, the Persian Gate had fallen. Ariobarzanes fought until the end, surrounded by the men who had chosen death over surrender. When the last of them fell, the pass grew silent once more, its echoes carrying the memory of courage and tragedy. When Alexander finally emerged from the Persian Gate, he looked upon a world laid bare. The mountains behind him held the ghosts of men who had fought with heartbreaking bravery. The road ahead led to Persepolis, the ceremonial throne of the Achaemenid kings, a city of gold and fire, of ancient pride and imperial glory. But something within Alexander had shifted. The battle at the Persian Gate had shown him the price of underestimating a desperate enemy. It had revealed the fragile boundary between triumph and disaster, and it had left him with a wound not easily seen, a wound to his invincible aura, a reminder that even the greatest conqueror walks through history on a blade's edge. Soon Persepolis would fall, flames would rise into the night, and Alexander would continue his march into legend. But the memory of that narrow canyon, where mountains nearly swallowed his destiny, would remain carved into the story of his life. For in the cold shadows of the Persian Gate, Alexander the Great had glimpsed the one thing even he could not conquer, the thin line between life and oblivion.